Before I begin, there are a couple of notes I have to make. The first is in regards to the visuals. Now, despite the fact that reviews are covered under fair use, a few of my videos have been blocked for copyrighted material anyway. And for the most part, it's not too big of a deal to dispute these claims, but in this particular case, we are talking about a Disney movie, and Disney is one of those companies that you don't want to mess with even by accident. Heck, they even shut down a parody from How It Should Have Ended that featured Wolverine singing Let It Go. So even though I try to be like the cool kids and use video clips when I can, I'm not going to do that this time. The second thing I would like to say is that I love this movie. It's one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. That being said, there are a few serious problems here that I plan to talk about, and I think it's important to learn from that because as good as Disney's animated work is, it's still rather troubling that it often keeps falling into the same traps. So if you're a fan of this movie and you're upset by some of the things I say here, keep in mind that I love it too. I only criticize because I care. On to the review. Wreck-It Ralph is kind of a cross between Toy Story and The Nightmare Before Christmas, but with video game characters. As the movie begins, we're introduced to Wreck-It Ralph, who's the villain from a fictional 1982 arcade game called Fix-It Felix Jr. And boy, is this game advanced for 1982, considering it has cutscenes and voiceovers. But anyway, we're given the backstory for the game, how Ralph used to live in the forest, but was tossed into the city dump to make room for a new apartment building. Ralph then tries to destroy the building, while the hero Felix tries to repair the damage. We're also told that the characters are like actors, and while their personalities are often influenced by their in-game personas, they are self-aware and can think like real people. In fact, when the arcade's closed, we see that Ralph and Felix are actually very friendly to each other. But even though the movie advertises itself as being about the villain, I want to make something clear. Even within the parameters of the game, Ralph is never actually shown to be a bad person. I mean, he's pissed off because his home was destroyed and now he has to live in garbage. I'd be mad too. We then see Ralph in a support group for other villains. It's now 30 years later, and it's starting to get to him to see how much better the hero gets treated. M. Bison warns Ralph about going turbo, and when I first heard this, I figured it was a reference to Street Fighter 2, especially coming from Bison. But I wasn't sure what it meant since, in the Street Fighter series, the turbo editions have generally been more popular than their predecessors. Everyone assures Ralph that bad guys are just as important as heroes, and that's very true in fictional works, and especially in video games. Without a bad guy to fight, the hero doesn't really have much purpose. Unless you're talking about something like Dance Dance Revolution, which actually shows up here, but that game doesn't really have heroes, it just has player avatars that are completely neutral. So I guess that helps reinforce the point. The meeting then ends with the bad guy affirmation. I'm bad, and that's good. I will never be good, and that's not bad. There's no one I'd rather be than me. Now, the meaning that I take from this basically boils down to be yourself. Learn what your strengths are and embrace them rather than spending your whole life wishing you could be someone else. And in general, I think that's a very good message. The only problem is that it really doesn't apply to Ralph as much as it applies to another character we'll meet later. Things don't really get bad until Ralph returns to his own game and sees a huge party going on in the apartment building as everyone celebrates their 30th anniversary, and apparently he was not invited. Now, even though it's been established repeatedly that he's not really bad and all the other characters are self-aware, it seems that the Nicelanders, as they're called here, are still afraid of him anyway. They even send Felix to get rid of him, but being the nice guy that he is, Felix invites him in for some cake. Ralph tries to acclimate to the party, but it's very clear that he's not welcome, and he soon gets into an argument with one of the Nicelanders named Gene. Gene is the biggest asshole in the entire movie. Ralph points out that he's a major part of the game and it's only fair that he gets some recognition, especially on their 30th anniversary. But Gene only sneers and goes, "No, only the hero gets respect. You deserve to be down in the mud." And I just don't get where this is coming from. I mean, these guys are actors, right? It would be like if Tom Hiddleston wasn't allowed to hang out with his co-stars from the Marvel movies just because he played a bad guy. Never mind that Loki is one of the most popular characters in the Marvel movie universe right now. Every time Mark Ruffalo walks by, he's obligated to body slam him like the Hulk did in the Avengers. Do you see how that kind of reasoning kinda seems like bullshit? And this is why I said the bad guy affirmation doesn't really apply to Ralph. This isn't about his role in the game, it's about everyone treating him like shit during his off hours. So, after trading a few more insults, Gene sarcastically says that if Ralph won a hero's medal, he'd give him a key to the penthouse. Ralph accepts the challenge and decides that the best way to get a medal is to sneak into a game called Hero's Duty, a rail shooter like Time Crisis with more more than a little inspiration from Gears of War. But we learn that the bad guys in this game are different. Unlike the other characters, the cybugs are not self-aware. Instead, they're more like real insects, operating on pure instinct, and so they have to be destroyed after every game or else they'll go out of control. Eventually, Ralph gets the medal, but he accidentally hatches one of the cybugs and then stumbles into an escape pod, launching clear out of the game and into a candy-themed kart racer called Sugar Rush. Unfortunately, he loses the medal when the ship crashes, and while trying to get it back, we're introduced to another character named Vanellope von Schweetz. This scene was in every trailer for the movie, and it's the only scene with Vanellope that I really don't like, because here she only acts like a mean-spirited brat. Much like Olaf in Frozen, Vanellope was another character Disney made me think I was going to hate, but ultimately, she ended up being fantastic. She takes the medal and uses it to enter a race. You see, in Sugar Rush, the playable characters change every day, and the way that's determined in the game's world is by holding a race when the arcade's closed. The only catch is that you need a coin from previously winning a race in order to enter. That's why Vanellope needed the round shiny medal. She's actually considered to be a glitch, and therefore she normally isn't allowed to race. And as soon as everyone realizes she's there, all hell breaks loose. But even that gets put on hold when Ralph shows up and starts wrecking everything while trying to catch Vanellope himself. He eventually gets arrested and brought to the castle to explain himself to King Candy. And I have to say, King Candy has some of the best lines in the movie. This guy's hilarious, and he's even played by Alan Tudyk from Firefly, not to be confused with Alan Tudyk from Transformers Dark of the Moon. Ralph explains that Vanellope took his medal, and King Candy accuses him of going turbo, even threatening him if he's here to take over the game. Now what could that mean? But after settling down a bit, Candy explains that the medal has been converted into code until after the race, which he then leaves to go and attend to. The Donut Police are instructed to bring Ralph back to his own game, but Ralph escapes and continues looking for Vanellope. And while all that's going on, we periodically cut back to Felix, who's now teamed up with Sergeant Calhoun, the squad leader from Hero's Duty, as they both try to find Ralph and the Cybug. And we finally get an explanation for what going turbo means. Apparently, Turbo was the main character in a racing game called Turbo Time, which was the most popular game in the arcade for a while. But as these things go, eventually a newer, better racing game came out, making Turbo jealous. He even left his own game and jumped into the new one, ultimately getting them both removed since everyone thought they were broken. Also, because it's Disney, there's a love story between Felix and Calhoun. Now, as love stories go, even by Disney standards, this is far from the worst one that I've seen lately. Looking at you, Kristoff. In fact, there are a number of elements here that are very good, and most of it has to do with how the characters are naturally fleshed out, and the movie even has a lot of fun with these scenes. It just seems kind of pointless for this particular story when you realize that you could remove this subplot and nothing else would be different. In any case, Ralph eventually catches up to Vanellope and sees her getting bullied by the other racers, and even though he's still mad at her, he rushes into her defense. Once they finally start listening to each other, they make an agreement. Vanellope will help get Ralph's medal back if he helps her get a new car, which he does with a bit of effort. But then Vanellope reveals that she doesn't actually know how to drive, which is kind of important for a racing game. They escape to Vanellope's makeshift home, a cave inside Diet Cola Mountain, and we get to know a little bit more about her. She swears that she's a racer despite evidence to the contrary, but even if she didn't feel that way, she doesn't have much of a choice since, unlike the other characters, being a glitch prevents her from leaving the game. So not only is she in a position similar to Ralph, she actually has things a lot worse. Ralph is trying to get respect, but Vanellope is fighting just to have a purpose in life at all. On top of that, she has no skill, everyone hates her, and she doesn't even have the option of going somewhere else. She's trapped in her own personal hell, and she's doing everything she can to make the best of it. Ralph decides to give her a fighting chance by making a practice track and teaching her how to drive, which is pretty funny since he doesn't know how to drive either. But after figuring out the basics, Vanellope turns out to be a natural, and before long she's ready to race. Meanwhile, King Candy uses the Konami code to access the game's programming and retrieve Ralph's medal. Felix also shows up at the castle, and he's immediately arrested because of his connection with Ralph. Later, after catching Ralph alone, King Candy gives him back his medal and explains the danger of letting Vanellope race. He says that if she becomes a playable character and starts glitching like she usually does, players will think the game is broken and it'll be unplugged, and since Vanellope can't leave, she'll die. Now, it's never really made clear if unplugging the game is what kills the characters or the fact that the game gets taken away and most likely scrapped. I also think it's bullshit that King Candy would pretend to be concerned about Vanellope considering that he was screaming bloody murder the last time he saw her, but it is very smart that he would use her to appeal to Ralph.